Good afternoon. My name is Richard Kaufman. I work at the Department of Energy. And so this panel is about energy efficiency. But before we begin, I was passed a note to remind the audience to go to the big room for the closing session. That's the big room, for those that don't know, is Potomac A. And we're supposed to remember this at the end, too. So I may say the same thing at the end. So energy efficiency is kind of the great opportunity, great economic opportunity, maybe one of the great ones of the 21st century. Let's see. Now, do I just push the button? What do I do? Different button. Okay. We need.
Oh, I see.
You see.
They have a splash. They just hit the one swing there. They don't have it should be working.
It should be working. There we are. Okay. So which?
No, I think the button should do it.
Now the button should do it. Okay. And so you can see here that really the United States and the OECD countries, we all spend a pretty high percentage of GDP on energy. And as you can see here, the pre-recession cost of energy as a percentage of GDP is the highest in 20 years. All right, I'm still hit this. No, I'm doing it backwards. This one. So I need one more time. Okay, so then, so you can see that the cost of not consuming is kind of 50 to 70% of the cost of actually production of electricity. So again, why is it that we don't save? Another way of thinking about it, and McKinsey's done, of course, a lot of work on this area, that you can think about energy efficiency as a vast, low-cost energy resource. And it's really, these are big numbers. You can see worth more than $1.2 trillion, more than the $500 billion. So I don't know many investment opportunities that have a 2-to-1 payback with such little risk, and a lot of job creation too. So the other interesting thing about energy efficiency, it's not like renewable energy generation. It doesn't require subsidies, and the companies that make stuff that's used in energy efficiency, for the most part, they don't require a massive scale to make money doing the things. So the puzzle is, why is penetration so incredibly low? So the economists would say that this is a market failure, because stuff like this shouldn't happen. When I took finance a long time ago, there's a finance joke, and it really isn't very funny, but it talks about a young student walking with his finance professor. They walk down the street, and the student sees a $20 bill on the sidewalk, and he says, "Look, professor, there's $20. And the professor says, "No, son, that isn't $20, because somebody would have already picked it up." As I told you, it wasn't a very good joke. But these things like this, these kind of market failures, should not happen. And so part of what we're going to try to do is to unravel this mystery today. And our emphasis is going to discuss the business and financial obstacles that stand in the way of greater adoption. And I think in particular, we hope that this discussion will inform those of you that are doing innovative things in energy efficiency technology, so you get a sense of what the obstacles are to adoption. So we will cover in our discussion, we have a very distinguished panel. We will discover, we have many different takes on the elephant, so to speak, from our different panelists. So Jeff Bartos, who is the second from my right, is the president and CEO of the MARC Group, and he's actually involved directly every day in providing energy efficient services to homes and businesses. As they put it, every week 6,000 homes get energy efficiency services from the MARC Group. And he also brings an international perspective, since the MARC Group is involved in other countries around the world. To his right is Carrie O'Neill. She's senior advisor to the Clean Energy Finance Center and is co-founder and president of the east of Earth Markets, and Earth Markets manages the Connecticut Neighbor-to-Neighbor Energy Challenge, which is a 14 community-based residential efficiency program. So she's involved in both a policy as well as in residential energy efficiency projects. Boy, everybody really sat very well. I don't know, means something. To her right is Riggs Kubiak, who is the co-founder and CEO of Honest Buildings, which I guess you'd say is a social network. Yeah, I'm very au courant. For building owners, tenants, and service providers. And he can address the role of information or lack of information in an industry that seems to value opaqueness. He also brings a background from his time at Tishman Speyer. And to his right is Marshall Salant. He was head of Citigroup's Alternative Energy Finance Group, where he provides soup to nuts financing. Is that fair? Or cradle to grave? That's the way it sometimes feels. Financing to energy projects. And he's long been a leader in innovative financing. So this energy efficiency puzzle is something that has been a particular area of interest to him. And finally, I said our panel was distinguished, so it's only fair that I end with John Byrne, who actually has distinguished in his title. He's a distinguished professor of energy and climate change at the University of Delaware. He's long been a member of the working group to the IPCC, and he's also a practitioner as well as a scholar. He's co-chairman of Sustainable Energy Utility and developed its innovative bond program for energy efficiency for state and municipal buildings. So he brings the state and municipal angle. So we have residential, commercial buildings, and and government buildings. So, John, maybe you can help us set the stage.
Thank you, Richard. Okay, so just briefly in setting the stage, I think this is... You
want to keep this one.
Okay.
You don't want that one.
Okay, I don't want this one. Sorry. So Richard made the point that, and so many have, that the value of this market is enormous. And so, for example, this is simply another set of calculations that were done on what would give us the true low-hanging fruit, things that pay off in less than 8 years. So, for example, in the public buildings and commercial sectors together, you've got over $50 billion of opportunity that will pay back in less than 8 years. In the more energy-intensive industrial sector, you've got over $80 billion, and you've got another $40 billion or so as estimated by a number of researchers in the residential sector. And yet, the dedicated funds to go capture this low-hanging fruit is clocking in at something around $5 billion a year. So it's taking us forever to get, just as Richard set up. I mean, this is something that looks like we should be after this, and yet we're not. One of the key reasons for that is that the building sector has and energy efficiency have a wide range of barriers that prevent straightforward transactions from going and capturing these kinds of opportunities, and we're going to talk through what those different barriers looks like. There are a range of barriers here that have to do with the mismatched incentives, who benefits against who has to pay the burden of the cost. There are a variety of problems around energy efficiency itself. There is still a belief that in some cases that energy efficiency won't actually return value. Speaking with the rating agencies a few months back, I can personally attest to that. There's still a view that energy efficiency doesn't return value. There are a series of problems that we have also on the policy side that don't give the kind of proper incentives. And so we're going to try and address these in the panel today, and I'm just going to quickly mention broadly a few categories that you can look at for this. If you're trying to get around the securitization problem, if you're trying to scale, and if you're trying to make this go quickly, you're going to need to find a way to get to performance guarantees. As Richard mentioned, we produced a bond that we can talk about more in the Q&A, but we produced a bond that was able to produce about a 35% or so return on investment from a AA plus rated bond for $73 million, 110 when all the costs are thrown in. Still, we have guaranteed money savings. This is not energy unit savings. These are money savings. So there are ways to package this. It's not easy to do, but there are ways to do that. A second option is to work on these incentive issues by building new institutions that either utilities partner with or that take on the responsibility, and I think you're going to hear about this in Connecticut and other places, where we build new entities that try to go after these savings. And these new entities, these third-party approaches, have actually been fairly successful. I'm just illustrating two here, the Energy Trust of Oregon and Efficiency Vermont. But both of those save, on average, 2 to 3 times at the rate. Their savings as a percentage of sales, they save a lot more than typically happens in the utility sector. There's a variety of reasons why that is, but there is, again, I think, some reason for hope that we know how to solve these kinds of problems. We also have the problem of measuring the risk in the case of energy efficiency, but again, I think if we were more thoughtful about the metrics that we put out about energy efficiency, and this is just one example produced by ACEEE. If we want to store value in financial instruments, it would look like energy efficiency is one that has much lower risk and much higher rate of return than many of the common vehicles that we use. And then finally, the problem of awareness and information. We are still a country that does not really understand energy, never mind energy innovation. But when you get people that kind of information, you often see them moving into the market much more quickly. So this is just an example that O-Power has had of providing the kind of information to consumers, and when that information is provided to them in a metric that they can understand, you often see a significant increase in participation rates in energy efficiency. So we have to solve all of these problems, all of these barriers. That is our challenge, but I think there are reasons for some hope in this regard, and hopefully the panel will convince you of that.
All right, so John, as you're sitting down, I'm going to give a warning to each of the panelists. I'm going to ask you each to tell a story. I always think that people remember stories maybe better than other things. So John, you had, as you say, this is a problem with lots of different elements. So you could have picked any part of the puzzle. So tell us a story as to why you picked sort of the part of the puzzle that you have with utilities, say, that you've founded, or on the bond structure. Tell us the moment, if there is one, when you thought, this really epitomizes the thing that I think is the key problem, and sort of what you did then. All right? Very good. I'm also going to put up a schematic here, and oops. Well, I'm giving you time to think. All right, so now I have to make this bigger, right? Yeah. Bottom on the right. I can't. Here? That one? Okay. So if you want, you guys can use this to say where you fit. This is an effort to try to be schematic about the market.
Okay, so yeah, on the question, is this working? No, it is sort of working. Here we go. Now it's working. On the question, I would say that the epiphany was when we had a very high increase in retail rates and electricity because residential rate caps came off a few years back. And suddenly, communities around our region were thrust into a very difficult situation where they had to pay a whole lot more for electricity suddenly, and they didn't have many options. And our approach till then, the policy approach till then, had been actually to slightly, not significantly, but slightly raise rates, and then ask from that pool that people participate in rebate and other sorts of programs to make that work. And it just occurred to me, this has got to be a not very good strategy. Raising electric rates, even if your bills are going to go down, still sends the wrong message that energy efficiency may be costly. So at that point, we started looking for a way to do a performance guarantee where we would take the savings that would come from energy efficiency, put that together in a strategy that would provide the right message, which is that we can actually pay for these technology improvements through the guaranteed money savings that come with the investments. Why did we pick the public buildings sector? The state of Delaware has a AAA plus rating, and if we want to pool and scale, which is what we wanted to do, we wanted to make, in the vernacular of President Clinton's mention this morning, just say yes strategies. We were looking for a just say yes strategy where we would provide full guarantees against a AAA rated credit. We could go to the rating agencies and do that. The commercial and residential and industrial sectors do not have that opportunity at this stage for a series of reasons, so we picked the lowest of the low-hanging fruit. We bundled. We got $73 million, which is not a big bond everywhere else in the world, but remember, the state of Delaware, when everyone is not at the beach, is a state of only 800,000 people, so we're just a little bit bigger than Washington, D.C. in population. So for us, that was a really, really big bond, and it was the biggest investment the state has ever made in energy efficiency.
All right, so Jeff, do you have an epiphany moment? What's your story?
I come to the energy efficiency space, and specifically to Mark Group, from a career in the home building industry. So 2010, I'm at my desk and get a call from a recruiter asking me if I wanted to be the CEO of a startup, and I hung up on him. But then I did eventually return his call, and what I loved about Mark Group, which has been in business since 1974, was the model of directly employing your workforce, providing a career path, having a dedicated training facility in each country. UK, you can do that. In the U.S., we're going to have more than one. But really building a career model around an excellent service, delivering energy efficiency upgrades to homeowners and to the department, well, they call it the Ministry of Defense, and to commercial owners. So I love that model. And personally, when I looked at our company, we had laid off, I personally had laid off 80% of our staff over a 3-year period in the home building industry, and watched a lot of good people lose their jobs. The only thing they did wrong was we didn't have any homes for them to build. And I thought, this is an unbelievable opportunity in the U.S. with the right policy framework and some very well marketed services. If we did our job right, we could employ an awful lot of people to do this work. So I jumped into the fray, started the business, we were funded from England, but started the business at my kitchen table in August of 2010. That didn't last too long because my wife threw me out of the house. I'm still married, but she said, you got to find an office. And since then, we've hired 63 people in Philadelphia. We're in PA, Delaware, and Maryland. PA, Delaware, and New Jersey every day, installing energy efficiency upgrades and trying to market. And I have to tell you, listening to President Clinton speak, I'm going to get a recording of that, because when the phone's not ringing on certain days, I'm going to play that recording and remind me why I did what I did, because I found his remarks to be inspiring.
Can you tell a story about actually an obstacle that you have to face?
Oh, sure.
That epitomizes the problem?
Customers, generally speaking, could care less about what we have to do until we engage them on a topic like comfort in their house. And so anytime we try to market into savings, or you're losing, or you could be saving, or even one-to-one conversations, people's eyes glaze over within 3 to 5 seconds. And I've tried it with a bunch of different messengers, so I know it's not just me. And we have to engage the customer on my room is always too hot in the summer and too cold in the winter. The room above the garage never functions right. My husband and I are fighting over the thermostat. So the big challenge we have
there seems to be some marital issues here. You want to? We're all here. We can have an intervention.
We got plenty of time, right? I think the biggest obstacle that we face on the residential side is total inertia and a certain amount of ambivalence on the part of our target market. And how do we overcome it? Persistence, and then really trying to learn from every ad, every time we knock a door, every time we meet with a customer, figuring out what we learned, and then refining the message to get people to call.
Okay, well, we'll come back to the solutions. So, Carrie, you got a story that's obstacle, epiphany?
Yeah, so I've spent several years in Connecticut, where we got started on the nonprofit, the Clean Energy Finance Center, and, crushing economic conditions, crushing budget conditions, but we have a state that had a lot of aspirations around energy goals and clean energy economy. And so, the legislature was constantly looking for ways to do more with less. And when I got involved and understood the scale of ratepayer funds that were available for the problem, and yet they were all going to a subsidy arrangement, and there was no leveraged finance going on, and I have a background in the mortgage securitization space, it just drove me nuts. And so the epiphany was the amount of education that was required to educate public policymakers around, especially coming off of the subprime meltdown, smart ways that you could take limited public dollars and lever them up with private capital and do it in a way that wasn't going to get folks not reelected the next time, and that would really do good. And so it's been interesting to see the chasm of knowledge and perspectives. It's like two foreign countries, two countries that don't speak the same language. The issues that the policymakers are dealing with, and the issues that investors have, and the issues that consumers have. So it's actually three countries, right? And how to bridge all that together in systemic programs that can scale. And so to me, the epiphany was just the lack of understanding that each party brought to the table, if they were even at the table, and often the investors were simply not part of the equation. So you saw public policymakers trying to create financing programs without ever speaking to investors or ever speaking to lenders and understanding what their needs were. And they have very specific needs. They need to make a profit. They need data to make risk-based credit decisions, et cetera, et cetera. On the consumer advocate policy side, you need to know that good work is going to happen and that people aren't going to be ripped off. So those were some of my epiphanies that came towards ultimately new models like the Green Bank, which maybe we'll talk about it later.
Great.
I had a pretty interesting experience as a chief sustainability officer, and which is a sort of more and more common role. I always called my job the chief agitator. So I was the guy who went around and would agitate people to make investments in energy efficiency. And you had to agitate them because people didn't really want to hear about energy efficiency. So there's this major lack of education and awareness around energy efficiency. And that became an increasingly challenging obstacle for me to overcome, until I had a moment where I said, what if I could show in my market that I was working in all of the different projects that were happening that I really wanted to get done that all of our competitors were doing. So I manually created a map, and I presented a map to say, this is what everyone's doing and this is what we are not doing. And what I realized is that there was this moment of, wow, we should really be doing those things. And out of that became this really interesting concept of, what if we could apply that to the market? What if we could utilize information, data, and transparency around all these incredible innovations that are happening all over our country and throughout the world globally? If we could aggregate all that information into one super easy use platform where we could filter, understand, educate ourselves, our partners, our investors, our tenants, we would have a really easy way to catalyze all of these projects that we really want to do. And if you can catalyze those type of projects, you start to lose the need to have conversations, those really challenging conversations about, and these conversations don't go away, but they become slightly less at the front of the table about ROI, about IRR, about what the payback could be. Those conversations are still going to happen, but if there's a competitive dynamic, those conversations become much more clear and easy to have because there's a real demand. So my aha moment was, how do we create demand for energy efficiency, and that's what we're working on.
Guess that's my turn. Thank you. My background was as a financial engineer. I've been working on developing new financial instruments for many, many years on Wall Street. And when I saw renewable energy and clean energy and alternative energy, whatever you want to call it, I was immediately attracted by the fact that they were big, giant, complex projects. And they needed lots of engineering to figure out how we, city, could help our clients finance these projects and get them done, which really comes down to a simple objective: get them the lowest cost of financing, the lowest cost of capital, wherever you could get it on the planet Earth. But that's a complicated thing to do in this space, because to compete, you need to take into account, number one, all of the different incentives that are out there. There are loan guarantees from the Department of Energy and the USDA.
Not anymore.
Not anymore. There used to be. And the USDA and other groups. There are state and local incentives, utility incentives. There are all kinds of tax benefits, accelerated depreciation, and PTCs and ITCs and other acronyms like that. There are export credit agencies from other countries. So there's these big deals that need all of those things, all those incentive programs, number one. Then number two is finding the right investors. So we are looking at projects that have debt financing in the bond markets and in the bank markets. We have fixed rate funding. We have floating rate funding. We have mezzanine debt. We have leasing structures, tax equity structures, project equity structures. We've done deals that are guaranteed that we split into two pieces for guarantees and non-guarantees. So we've stripped them. We've got deals that we strip and we staple back together because of investor preferences in the insurance world. We also help these companies, number three, with their big hedging issues, because when you build a solar or a wind project, it takes 2 or 3 years to build. If interest rates go up 300 basis points, the whole project could die on the vine. Or commodity hedging, if they can't get a power purchase agreement signed with the utility, could we buy the power from them and hedge that? Or one of the other ones that was critical was foreign exchange hedging even really mattered. If you're a Spanish or German company, you build a giant multi-billion-dollar project in America, if euro versus US dollar starts to move around, that can kill a project. So lots of moving pieces that we needed to deal with. So we built a group to deal with all these issues at Citi. And we said, let's have an alternative energy finance group that will become expert in all these different issues for clean energy projects. And we do the big giant projects, the $2 billion, $3 billion projects, to the little rooftop deals. So we did a number of rooftop solar deals, and that's how I got into energy efficiency, because when we did transactions for Solar City and Sungevity and SunPower and SunEdison and Constellation, we saw a business model that I thought was amazing. And the business model, very simply put, was they're going to put solar power systems on people's roofs. And that's clearly a good thing. People would love to have solar power on their roof. It gives them clean fuel, clean energy, replace fossil fuels, good for the environment, et cetera, et cetera. And it was a great business model. If you paid the local utility $100 a month for your electricity, you weren't going to pay them $100 a month anymore. You're only going to pay them $35. And now you're going to pay the person who put the solar system in your roof $50. Well, if you pay one guy $35 and the other one $50, that's $85. You used to pay $100, you've saved $15 a month. And you could lock that in, put no money down up front, sign a 10 or 12-year lease or even longer, and you've just saved $15 per month, every month for that period of time, and you don't have to worry about oil prices going up and down and electricity prices going up because you've locked your payments in. And when we saw that model, we said, that's a great model. We've got to figure out a way to help them finance that, because that should be rolled out all over the U.S. And that's what led us to doing pool financings on rooftop solar, which then led to energy efficiency.
So I guess just listening to the panel, I know what your reaction is, but my first reaction is that this is one of the reasons why this is a difficult problem is that it's a pretty complex one. Because I think you all in your own way have talked about complexity. And I guess there are kind of three themes that I've heard about. And the first theme that you guys talked about is that it's not what you think, even though the first slides we talked about showed about the economic opportunity. In fact, it seems like maybe the dollars and cents aren't the thing that you lead with, that you lead with comfort or marital harmony, or Ridge talked about, this sort of competition as a dynamic. And I'm reminded of the study that was done about the towels, in the hotel, the cards, the placard that talks about, you should save the planet. It turns out that's not really an effective card. That the most effective card says that 75% of the people that stayed in this room hung up their towels, and because it's really more about being part of not wanting to be left out than about saving the planet. So it seems like maybe part of this is about behavioral economics. So one theme is it's not just about dollars and cents, and maybe I'd like to hear more about for those that are really involved at each step of the process, some of the words and some of the marketing that you use. That would be very interesting to explore. Then this point about information, a lot of each of you in a certain way talked about need for critical bits of information, so maybe you could each talk about that. And then the last part is finance, because how critical is finance to this? It seems each of you, or several of you, talked about the challenges of mobilizing capital, and I think in particular, when we get into that, I'd like to hear about whether this is an area that banks are actually going to be lending to. So let's start with the part about Jeff. Why don't you come back to you talked about crafting the messages in light of what works and what doesn't work.
Well, so at the beginning, before January, I think I remarked to somebody that the business was set for a great first quarter. The only thing that would stand in the way is if natural gas were free or it was 70 degrees in the middle of the winter. So, yeah.
How are you with the ponies?
Yeah, not so good.
Yeah.
I think loss aversion, and I think we heard a little bit about it yesterday, loss aversion, I'm not a behavioral economist, but loss aversion is a more powerful message we're finding than you can save X. So in our marketing, if we're going to talk at all about what the out-of-pocket or you can finance your savings or pay as you save model, we really do focus in on loss aversion when we're talking to customers. You are losing $8 today, $240 this month, $1,280 last year, and the only reason you're not really angry about it is you had no idea. That can get people's attention, and then typically, and I'd be curious to hear, just personal experiences as well as professional experiences. I think people really do relate to my house is not, or my building or my office doesn't perform the way I want it. At a certain point, I just accept it because what am I going to do about it? And when you provide or when you present a solution, and whether that solution is you don't have to put up with the drafty doors and windows, you can insulate the underside or the floor of your second floor over that attic. Over the garage. You can insulate your attic to Energy Star standards and really start to enjoy a more comfortable winter and summer, the peak seasons here in the Northeast. You get people's attention and they act. So our messaging and our marketing is all about either loss aversion or that comfort. You don't have to put up with this anymore in your house.
And so what doesn't work, other than talk about, is there a particularly memorable thing that didn't work?
Being preachy and saying stop wasting energy was not one of the better marketing slogans that we've come up with. People either felt like we were talking to them as if we were their parents, getting back into family dynamics, or they just felt like we were being preachy.
Yeah, because there's a rumor. I haven't talked to you about this, but there's actually a rumor about your company, and that you compare the energy savings of one building to your neighbor. Is that true?
We don't. Well, I'm trying to think. We have a marketing piece that we've used that says your neighbor's not going to put up with a drafty house this winter. You should do something about it too. So we've done that. We've engaged on your neighbors are doing it, so why aren't you?
Uh-huh.
And we've absolutely done that. We did those with door hangers. So that had some uptake, and I think there is that competitive spirit between neighbors certainly works, and we work really hard to put as much marketing material as people will allow us to outside the home, so there's a whole neighbors peering in and seeing what they're doing.
We're using that in the residential program, the 14-town program. We're using extensive neighbor competition strategies, community-based strategies, and in addition to the competition, the one thing that we're finding works is a lot of different testimonials getting at different demographics and different problems. We had a huge ice dam issue back in October last year, so ice dams is something that resonates with people. A lot of folks who just, their rooms are uncomfortable, and so we've got great stories. I never knew how uncomfortable I was until I had this done. So just making energy more relevant to people's lives, and we do have a behavioralist on staff, and so loss aversion does work, and those using those tricks of the trades that consumer packaged good marketers use all the time, but applied into energy, is starting to be effective.
I should say, as a follow-up, in the UK, we aggregate carbon savings. So we're in 6,000 to 7,000 homes a week. We have a ready-made customer base because the utilities are more or less paying the bills. We're aggregating those carbon savings and selling them into the marketplace on a quarterly basis, and that's our business in the UK. Looking at the U.S., we've had to come up with a completely different business model because that just, we wouldn't do very well with that model here in the U.S.
I'm trying to understand, is what you're saying is it relates to how you get paid, or does it relate to the marketing that consumers care about carbon savings in the UK?
No, there's no marketing in the UK because the marketing in the UK is you can have your loft insulated for £99. Where do you want to sign up? It'll pay itself back in less than 2 years, and I mean it's a totally different market, a totally different way of doing business. I mean that's a nice way of doing business. We just don't have that option here.
John, you're nodding, so you must have something to say here.
Well, I do agree with colleagues. I think partly this is a question of getting people to understand, and in our case, we worked with public buildings, but I have to say facilities managers don't see this as their primary requirement to make buildings perform well. They have different sorts of requirements, like buildings shouldn't leak, there shouldn't be a variety of problems that are called in about those buildings. And the last thing they're thinking about is energy efficiency, although many times the two are linked together. We saw competition in a similar fashion. It wasn't neighbor to neighbor, but when we did the financing, before going to the market, we posted what were the savings by company and how much money it was taking to drive those savings. And once we exposed that to all of those facilities managers, they suddenly became interested in knowing why the prison was getting a better benefit out of its dollar than the courthouse was. And when that happened, I think that also created a much better overall financing, because we now had active participants that wanted to get into it. And I just close on what Mark was saying, Jeff was saying on the market signals. If you do put the right kind of policies in place, I think market signals can work very, very well. If you don't have certain policy signals, then it makes it really difficult. So whoever it is, if they don't get to keep the benefits of these savings, if I'm a public agency and I indulge in this particular activity, but the benefits of that efficiency improvement don't come back to my agency, it instead goes back into some general budget category or whatever, the likelihood that folks are going to make serious efforts to do that diminish. So I think there is a question of behavior, but I think it's often also a question of policy. You need to make the two work together. You give me an opportunity to sell my carbon reduction as part of my way to then make choices. It changes the way we behave.
So Riggs, competition. You brought up this topic.
I did, and I'm extremely happy to hear the other panelists reinforce what we're doing, because what we've done is sort of created a global competitive platform for every building that exists with an address. So it's going to get pretty interesting pretty quickly if this happens, and we can engage this sort of ecosystem around every building to come together and actually showcase what they're doing on buildings. Fortunately, the trends are with all of us with open data, and I think that's something that we should probably address. There's a huge amount of data around not only energy at the individual building level, but from cities with all the different benchmarking initiatives happening, and that's really beneficial, because with all that data, we have this sort of built-in competitive metrics that already exist. So one of the things that we're trying to do is not only allow there to be a sort of head-to-head, building-to-building competitive competition, but cities, right? I mean, it comes back to policy. What cities are doing the most? What policies are actually working? How can we create and follow those metrics and make sure that policies are actually effective? And the only way to do that is to have a sort of national platform where mayors can compete against each other for the most effective policies. And hopefully the U.S. can compete against other countries in terms of how effective we're being on a national scale. That's sort of a lofty ambition for what we're trying to do. That's not what we're trying to do today, but I think that the point is that it gets very interesting very quickly with that competitive dynamic. And it's great to hear sort of all of us being focused on it in a different way.
So let's talk, Marshall, you have anything to contribute on this part about competition? Or,
well, the one good thing I would add there is that it appears that finally in the corporate world, people are starting to focus on this a little bit more, because there's massive potential savings there, and to the extent that it falls right to the bottom line, there's lower energy costs, which ultimately means more profit, higher stock price. That gets companies' juices flowing.
All right, so let's talk about this point about information. So, Reece, you brought it up, so why don't you keep going?
So I think information is absolutely critical. I think we're all on the same page. And unfortunately, for whatever reason, when it comes specifically to buildings and really the real estate market, information has been lacking. The entire real estate industry has very little public information, which is being augmented now by policy work, which is fantastic. But there's sort of a lack of a place to put information until recently, with a lot of different companies, specifically around energy, being able to track that information and actually post it on the residential side. I mean, companies like Mark Group, but also O-Power and those guys are starting to come up with very clever ways to harness information and sort of unleash that back to the market. So I think...
Excuse me for interrupting, but maybe you could be more specific to those that aren't expert. What kind of information are you really talking about? Can you really get very specific about the kind of information that is relevant to this topic?
Sure. I think we could talk for hours.
Well,
there's a lot.
But let me get that specific.
I think energy use at the building level, energy use per square foot, especially on the commercial level, is at its basic core the fundamental starting point for energy information and a comparison metric. In addition to that, the aggregate energy used, I think, is very interesting as well, because although larger buildings are inherently disadvantaged just because of their size, they also shouldn't be ignored because they actually have, in the aggregate, the largest problem to solve in terms of energy use at the gross level. So being able to calculate energy use intensity and showcase that information at a building-specific level alongside aggregate energy use, I think those could be the two sort of important metrics, and fortunately those metrics are in line with what most of the cities are using for their benchmarking initiatives. So that information will become public here in the next year in New York, in Seattle, in Washington, D.C., in San Francisco, and a few other cities and states to follow, which is great. That's just a great start. So if that public policy initiative can sort of drive demand into the private market, there are ways that we can elicit that information from the private market and continue to grow that database and knowledge and awareness. And as soon as you can understand where you rank, if you're a poor performer, all of a sudden the question comes, what can I do about that? And as soon as that question comes, and it's what can I do, and there's answers like call the Mark Group, there's a transaction that can be unlocked, and that's creating demand. So I think inherently before demand, information is really what we need as a fundamental baseline as a country.
So, Carrie, can you talk about information and the information, your take on the information question?
So I have a somewhat pessimistic take on the information question because I see a host of challenges and not ready answers. Specifically around, so I love the benchmarking and the energy intensity. I think that's great. If you can get access to that, that's wonderful. But now when you're ready to do that transaction, where I see a lot of barriers at the moment are, well, how do I know that the model that you're using to tell me, what sort of savings I'm going to get works? Is it real? Prove it to me. This is not just investors, by the way. Consumers are the first ones that are going to ask you that. Your customer wants to know, does it work? And so historically, we've got, some engineering models. We've got some deemed savings models that the utilities like to do. I have a personal belief that deemed savings is the enemy, and it doesn't really help our cause. And so what we don't have is ready access to large data sets of upgrades that have been undertaken and what their actual performance is versus what the estimates were when it was audited or whoever put your original work scope together. And that's an issue from a consumer perspective. It's a policy issue. It's an investor issue. And that data, and it's a rating agency issue, as John found out. Your consumer advocates, cry fraud, and, that lack of data is huge. And it's something the industry really hasn't tackled in a meaningful way yet. And I think there's a lot of work to be done there. I think the role of states is that, if a state is going to put public money on the line and try to attract private capital and do program design, we should be demanding as state programs things like energy usage data, understand what the estimates are and what the actual usage is, work with your utilities to get that. That is a state-by-state fight, of course, but I think those are some of the things that need to happen.
She's absolutely right. I mean, we have been looking at for the last 4 or 5 months a commercial call it an ESCO type of model, but more along the lines of what Metris and some of the other companies are doing on the equity side. And raising the capital is not that hard, and finding the pipeline of buildings isn't that hard, but building the model and actually having real audits and enough real audits to test that model is, I don't know, nothing's impossible, but it has been extraordinarily difficult to get enough data to test that model. And I mean, we have enough of a Rolodex to be able to go out and make phone calls, and I've spoken to the DOE's Energy Efficiency Innovation Hub is where our office is. I mean, we're next door at the Navy Yard in Philadelphia. And DOE is really focused on this. I mean, the folks there are focused on trying to build a library of data just for that. But they don't have it now. And that is a barrier. It's an absolute barrier to companies like ours. We're not Johnson Controls or Honeywell or Siemens. If you're a small or a medium-sized company out there, you can't just jump into this and start doing it because that data is not there to test the model.
So, John, you talked about very much at the beginning about the guarantee. So,
yeah, I think I think information is a problem. I would just offer that the problem can also be even more basic, like where do I go to find out? I think what energy efficiency sometimes looks like to potential users is, if you will, a parts industry. There's a bit over here, there's a bit over there. You can go to appliances over here. You can go to someplace else to get this piece of information over there. There isn't, in effect, a one-stop shop. So I think if we find a way to get that sort of information so that people know when they call your company, they will be able to get the full list. A lot of times they don't even know what would be their options. But if you can provide enough information that they know what that list looks like, I think that can be very, very important. But at the end of the day, a simpler way of solving this problem is that if one has to get into econometrics to figure out whether or not the bill savings actually retire the debt in 5 years or less, or you simply build a performance guarantee into the relationship so that the individual is guaranteed those dollar savings. It's no longer the problem of the consumer to become a modeler in order to figure this out. There's a lot of modeling that's going to have to go on behind it, but it seems to me the consumer really wants to simply buy what would be a more comfortable home, some improvement in the performance of their building. They don't want to become a modeler in the process and try and understand all this data. I live with models and data, but I don't think that's what most consumers want. And for that reason, I think a performance guarantee approach is really essential to get efficiency to scale to the levels that it would.
Or warranty.
Or yes.
All right, so I guess, Marshall, this comes to you, since you also like to live with models, the self-professed financial engineer. So maybe you can really set the stage here for us in this, and how important data is to finance, and both, as I said before, from both the standpoint of how you think banks will look at this in terms of holding it on their own balance sheet, as well as the possibility of harnessing the bond market.
Sure, and the trick will be to get through this quickly. We could spend hours on this, but I would start on the data front with not what you're expecting. I would start with, you need data for the consumer to decide whether or not to go ahead and actually make the energy efficiency upgrade. But we're finding also that data is critical in terms of awareness. And what I mean by that is the following. How many of you sitting in the audience live in a house or an apartment that's had a really deep energy efficiency upgrade on it? And do you even know?
Yeah, do you even know?
Do you even know whether that's the case? And if you know the answer to that because maybe you did it yourself, which is a wonderful thing, do you know if the building you work in has had an energy efficiency upgrade? Do you stay at hotels that have had energy efficiency upgrades? Do you buy consumer products that are energy efficiency conscious? We see that as a big driving force in the future. When you've got on the government side people like the Department of Defense saying that they want to do it, or the municipalities saying they want to do it. But even on the consumer product side, if Coca-Cola goes on a campaign saying, buy Coke, not Pepsi, because we're more energy efficiency or we're better for the environment, that would be a whole new element to this equation if people start marketing their products based on their usage of energy efficiency. So that's where I'd start. In terms of the use of data and what can be done on the financing side, once you get over that, and assuming the consumers actually say, yes, we want to do the transaction, The big problem that we have is that there are so many different flavors of energy efficiency upgrades. It is collectively, or it is broadly speaking, the opportunity is everywhere in the U.S. and around the planet, but it's concentrated nowhere. And what that means is that the search for scale to do it on a low-cost basis is very complex because you need multiple solutions. This is the classic case where one size will not fit all. We're going to need many, many different products with many, many different segments to make this work. And we see that. There are lots of obstacles, again, where the data comes in, where people want to know, well, will the savings really be there, and who takes the risk if they're not? That's the critical question. And away from data, on the financing side, we say data's half the equation, guys, but there's another half on the financing side, and that is, okay, let's assume it all works the way it's supposed to. Who's going to pay us back? Whose credit are we looking at? Let's assume all the engineers were right and the product works and everything did exactly what it was supposed to do, but the person who did the transaction could still run into business problems and not have the money to pay us back. They're saving lots of energy, but they're not producing any product, so they're not making any money. They're in default. We don't get our money back. So that is one piece of it, but there's a huge obstacle there. And many banks originally went into this thinking, oh, we could do it like secured lending. I think that's been completely discredited at this point. There is no security, there is no collateral in the vast majority of energy efficiency upgrades. Because let's be realistic. If you do an energy upgrade and we claim we've got security in the product, that's bogus. We're not going to go in and repossess the new lights you put in the roof or in the ceiling, or the insulation you put in the walls, or take the new wires out of the walls. That's ridiculous. We're not going to take the new efficient boiler out of your basement and repossess it and let the senior citizen freeze to death in the winter. That's not going to be good for PR. There is no security. It's not collateralized. We've got to look at other ways to do it, and we can talk more later about that's why there's so many. There's a proliferation of different structures out there to deal with the question of, yes, you need data, but who's the credit? Who's going to pay us back? And that's going to depend very much segment by segment. We're working on 11 different flavors now.
Well, so there are...
I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, that's good. So when you talk about 11 different... Why are there 11 different flavors?
Well, because the slide after this one had 4 bars on it. The sort of the government sector, so we call it the MUSH market, municipal, university, school, hospital, MUSH. The residential sector, that's sort of self-evident, commercial and industrial. They're all different because it comes back to, again, who's going to pay us back? There's been probably the most progress in the MUSH market because they're identifiable credits. You know the municipality or the university or the school and the hospital. They're big, they're rated, they're creditworthy. Some people are very advanced and sophisticated and have been innovators. The state of Delaware, we worked with them. We did this sustainable energy utility deal. It was $67.4 million. It supported $75 million of projects for, I think it was 5 different state agencies, a big chunk of which being prisons, the corrections department. People don't always think about prisons need energy efficiency also. They waste a huge amount. That was a great deal, but we knew that Delaware was standing behind it, at least indirectly, so it's something that could be financed. We are looking at, as another, that'd be one of the 11 flavors. Another flavor is we're working with a firm to do a warehouse and then a pooled structure to finance $400 million of different projects across different states, each one of which is in that MUSH market, not one of which is large enough to be done standalone, but we're going to pool together 50 to 100 different projects, which in total will be $400 million, and we'll work with them to do that. Then there's another project we're doing, which is probably 50 to 100 million just for one state university, where again, they have the ability through revenue bonds and through the affiliation with the state to raise money. So in all those cases, it's clear for every one of the projects who the credit is, and they're all credit worthy. On the residential side, that's always been tricky, because look at what's happened in the mortgage market, and we've all read about the debacle there. The way we're addressing that, again, is through different structures. We are working with a group called Renewable Funding. We will hopefully, in the near future, within a couple of months, do the first $100 million medium-term note program for them, where we're going to help them pull together with a couple of states. We're going to warehouse these tiny little loans, $2,000, $7,000, $17,000, $26,000, individual residences and small commercial. We're going to pull them together. City will lend the money to that with some others, and then we're going to securitize these things and put into the bond market long-term securities. This would be the first actual rated securitization deal. People have been talking about it for 3 years. Nothing was really close. We've now spent the years with the rating agencies doing the painstaking information analysis. Why do the rating agencies have a problem? Because there's no history. If you want to do a 12-year bond, they want to see multiple 12-year cycles to see if people pay it back, to decide what it should be rated. The data's not out there, and it's not going to be for another 10 years because we've only got 2 years of data. So it's tricky to do that, but we hope to do this. And we at Citi and most other big banks are not set up to go lend to 20,000 different homeowners in $1,000 and $2,000 and $3,000 and $7,000 installments. We're not set up to do that. What we're going to do is we're going to work with local banks and local finance companies that know each one of you and know whether or not you're a good credit and whether or not you can pay it back. And then we're going to buy the loans from them, pool it together, and then securitize it once we get to the right size. We're also looking at, I'll go more quickly, we won the mandate in New York State to do their first on-bill program where people will get billed for their energy efficiency on their utility bill. Utilities in New York were told they had to do this, so therefore they've agreed to do it. And the thought is that that's a better credit because you're not likely to default on the payments that you owe your electricity company. Historically, it's a very, very low default rate. So we're looking there at on-bill. Another thing we're looking at in the commercial sector is commercial PACE. We've been shortlisted for Florida to do the PACE program there on the commercial side. And then on the industrial side, which is related to commercial, we're doing a couple of direct large projects where it's an individual corporate credit that we can examine. We're doing a pool of investment-grade corporate credits, and we're doing a pool that's 80% investment-grade, 20% below investment grade, and then a couple of ESCO and ESA transactions. So all in all, 11 different flavors for each of those 4 different segments. Depending on where you are in that segment, there's a different structure that's going to work. One size does not fit all. But the good news is stuff is getting done.
All right, so Kerry, maybe you could talk just for a second about the PACE program, how that fits in, and also how you see the financing part, how critical that is to what you're trying to do.
Yeah. So in Connecticut, we have one of these new state green bank models, quasi-public, very flexible model, and it is to address what Marshall just described. Big sectors require different things. So commercial PACE is one of the things that Connecticut's looking to develop, assuming we get our technical fixes in our legislation, so we're doing program development at the same time. And Connecticut's a small state, so the idea there is do a statewide district that municipalities could opt into and develop a program there, like Miami, like LA County. So building on the work that's been done elsewhere. And I think one of the important learnings is we have to build on the work that's being done elsewhere, otherwise folks like Marshall will not play, because you can't just keep inventing new structures. So definitely excited about that.
But you should say what PACE is for people that don't know what PACE is.
Property Assessed Clean Energy. It's a way of addressing the issue of, you may not be in your property very long, and therefore if you're doing a project that's going to pay back over 15 or 20 years, you put the repayment on the tax bill, the municipal assessment, and therefore you can overcome some of those issues around, the horizon for lending, the horizon on projects. And there's a great precedence in this country around the ability to use the assessment for special benefits. So very excited about that as an opportunity. In terms of how important financing is, there is an interesting consumer question around this. On the residential side in particular, I don't think it's as relevant on the commercial side. We see financing being necessary in the conversation with the consumer to get them to commit to the project, but we see a lot of drop-off in terms of who actually takes the financing when they decide to commit. So you can lose as much as 2/3 of your folks, sometimes 75% of your folks who they needed the financing, they needed to know it was there to commit, but then they pay out of cash or they pay out of savings or on credit card. And it's a worry when you're looking at scaling, and it's a worry for programs that are getting you, Marshall, all excited about the volume. I worry about whether the volume will materialize, but it is an important sales tool.
So, Jeff, do you offer financing? And where do you get your money?
Well, DOE has funded into the greater Philadelphia market, so Philadelphia and the 4 surrounding counties, a program called Energy Works, which offers 0.99% financing, up to a 10-year term, for numbers up to $15,000 worth of work. And you would think, wow, it's basically free money. And it is, Carrie's absolutely right. It's a good tool to overcome objections, as long as the salesperson, and it all starts with who's presenting it, right? So companies like ours need to do a better job presenting that and training our salespeople to talk about financing and not being afraid to talk about unsecured debt and all those other things. So we have that pool of money. We also work with a company called AFC First Financial, which I think is one of the leading energy efficiency banks, for lack of a better word, nationally. They run a lot of state programs, and they offer, their rates depend on the state, but from as low as 0.99% in the Philadelphia suburbs up to 14.99% unsecured fixed-term loans for energy efficiency upgrades. So that is available out there. That type of financing is available out there, and that provides all that we need right now. But the customer, absolutely right. Customers, you use it to overcome the objection, but ultimately at a $2,500, $3,000, they're just going to pay you. And at $10,000, even though the financing is almost free money, they get very scared because we're still all dealing with the post-Lehman Brothers financial shock. Am I going to lose my job? Is this going to happen? So you start to worry about taking on debt, even at a low rate.
So John, this goes back, I think, to your insight at the beginning about a way to have somebody step in to get paid for the savings.
That's right.
For putting the capital in. Can you talk more about that?
Sure. Yeah, I think, again, I really think that we've got to solve that problem in order to make this thing go to scale. We have to find a way to, Marshall indicated in the flavors, there are going to be different ways in which you step in to provide that guarantee, but right now we have a market that is very niche-oriented, and there are only certain places where this sort of guarantee approach is working. And as long as we keep it at that niche level, we'll scale to that level, and it's unlikely that we're going to present opportunities for the residential sector, what both Carrie and Jeff were saying, that are really going to make sense to customers. They're instead going to think it's their bank account that needs to pay for this. And just a quick metaphor on that score. If you thought that you would pay for power plants by asking every customer that would be connected to a power plant, would receive electricity from a power plant, that they had to go to their own bank and write a check against their account for that, we probably would get next to nothing in terms of power plants built. We never financed these kinds of opportunities in the past this way, but we have treated energy efficiency as though it is on the individual homeowner's bank account, rather than treating this as an infrastructure issue and creating a financing vehicle that really makes sense for all of society to participate in it. So I think our challenge is to find a way to make this guarantee work in the way that we did to build power plants. We now need to do it treating sustainable energy as equivalently an infrastructure for our future. And until we get the 12 flavors or the 11 or the 16, whatever it is, put in that format, we're going to underinvest in the manner that unfortunately we saw. And I just say as one last note on that point, the reason that we created the Sustainable Energy Utility is to put to work an entity that would find its job as 24/7 thinking about how to get those 11 or 12 different varieties to work so that the participation in sustainable energy investment could truly be infrastructure. And so that's I think, where we need to get. Otherwise, we're going to continue to scale to niche.
So I think this would be a good time to turn to questions and answers from all of you. Tried to find it. So maybe there's a microphone up there.
Hello. So this question's from Marshall.
Two microphones. Okay, I'm sorry. Sir.
Is this on?
It is.
My name is Ralph Avalon. I'm president of the National Green Energy Council. We're an advocacy organization based here in D.C. I, too, sir, was a builder for 20 years. We established the organization in 2007. I have some comments food for thought, but I assure you it will evolve into a very great question. We need to keep the education simple, stupid. In 1975, there was an ad in the National Enquirer to send a guy $1 and he would send you away to save exorbitant amounts of gasoline during the gas crisis. What he sent you back from sending him $1 was a postcard that said, if you drive a pickup truck, drive with the tailgate down. When it comes down to simple stupid for either the corporate world, the political world, or homeowners, you have to show them that they can put green from green in their pocket. All of those entities. In 2005, the American Appraisers Association of America came out with a report that said for every dollar that you invest in energy efficiency into a home in America, you can add its equal dollar amount to the appraised value of that home. In 2006, we approached Wells Fargo, Fannie Mae, and Freddie Mac and said, why can't we fund energy efficiency retrofits and solar energy applications over 30-year mortgages? Unfortunately, by the time we got any steam on that, the entire development world had collapsed. We then said, if you want to recapture American manufacturing, charge a carbon import tax on manufactured goods outside of the United States, take that carbon tax and create green energy investment trusts, where those trusts would now invest in energy efficiency retrofits. 26% of the energy that America makes every single day goes to lighting over 80 million residential homes and 100 million commercial and institutional buildings on the grid. If we just transformed the retrofits of light bulbs in those homes and businesses and corporate buildings and institutions to LED bulbs, we would reduce that output down to 6%. We've concentrated on a case point, simple, stupid. We went to the Mohegan Tribe in Uncasville, Connecticut, and I know that the lady up there who's representing the Connecticut NGO will appreciate this. The Mohegan Tribe owns a real estate investment trust. They build every single building for the Native American community. Their electric bill was $1.6 million a year. Our organization went to the tribal council with all the affiliated entities to go from their broom closet to their roof. We have found 30 megawatts of rooftop solar energy to install there, 36 megawatts of parking lot awning solar array installations, 15 megawatts of onshore wind along the Uncasville River, 5 megawatts of hydroelectric power. In one property in Uncasville, Connecticut, Connecticut can meet its 20 by 20 renewable energy goals. We're looking for financing for this project for the Mohegan Tribe.
So is the question coming?
The question is right now.
Definitely we're having.
With over 80 million residential homes on the grid and 5 of the largest home builders now not knowing to make money in the future, how can we get them into a forum to say, you have AutoCAD architecturals for homes that you've built all over America, create energy efficiency retrofit programs inside of your corporations because you know the electrical drawings of those homes and what needs to be retrofitted, and how do we partner those builders with the investment community to start funding those poor Americans who can't afford their electric bills anymore?
Don't look at me.
Great points. I think, and speaking as a former division president at Toll Brothers, the executive team is so focused on how you build and how you grow and how you take the next piece of ground that the infrastructure is not, I can only speak to one builder, but the infrastructure is not in the builder to do that today. It doesn't mean that there couldn't be, but I think if you gave them a builder a turnkey solution, like they're used to dealing with subcontractors all over the place, if you gave them a turnkey solution that just said to them, let us market to your, I mean, in the case of Lennar or Horton, tens or over 100,000 homes that you've built over the last 20 years, let us market to them and we'll do this work and we'll send you a check for allowing us to market to your database and maybe putting your name on the letterhead so that they'll take the call or call us back or talk to us when we come to the door. That's probably the easiest way to get a builder's attention in terms of getting them to work. I couldn't think how I would get my former colleagues to focus on that when they've got all the other things that they're doing at the builders community. In terms of, I think that's yeah.
Anybody else here on that question? Yes, sir.
This is from Marshall. I think that when you were describing the solar program, you were describing a lease arrangement?
Yes.
And, of course, what we want to try and do is whole house retrofits, deep whole house retrofits. And it seems like financing is more readily available for lesser retrofits. And so I was wondering, when you did that leasing arrangement, at the same time, were you doing the modeling, the assessment, selling the whole house retrofit at the same time? And would financing be available for that?
I wish that was an easy question to answer, but you are correct. We are correct. We were looking at rooftop PV. We started with what's been the history for these companies that lease out solar rooftop systems, like a SolarCity or Sungevity or Sunrun. They have data, not very extensive because they've only been in business a couple of years. And it turns out the default rates are incredibly low, which is what you'd expect, because, as I said, if the combination of what you pay them and your old utility together is less than what you used to pay, 85 versus 100 in my example, you're saving 15. If you default on the solar payment, they flick a switch, they shut it off, now you're back to paying your local utility. And guess what? You owe them $100. So if you don't pay, your rate goes up. It doesn't go down. And in today's world, people need electricity more than ever on the residential side. Think of yourselves or your kids without computers and without iPhones and iPads and Blackberries and everything else being charged every day and every night. So first we looked at their default rate, very, very low. Then we looked at what are electricity default rates across the U.S. Not as easy to get that data, but it's out there. And it turns out default rates on your electric utility bills in general in most parts of the U.S. are very, very low, less than 0.5% per annum on average. And that includes renters as well as owners and all kinds of other things. And then we also looked at mortgage defaults, because that's your real downside case as a worst case scenario. And what we concluded was that there was enough data to support getting comfortable on large pools of rooftop solar. Now, at the time, those companies were not also offering deep full house retrofits, so they didn't have any data on that, so we couldn't supply any of that. And although, as I said, it's hard to believe you're going to go repossess boilers and insulation and light bulbs and paint from a house, you could at least argue that if they shut off the solar system on the house, you're going to go up on the roof, take the panels off, and eventually there will be a secondary market for solar panels. So there's a lot of things that make it easier to do it for rooftop, and counterintuitively, that's why we're doing the first securitization for energy efficiency, where you don't have any of those advantages, because we'd like to set with the rating agencies what's the worst case that they can live with for unsecured consumer credit for energy efficiency loans. Rooftop solar PV has to be better than that for all the reasons that we just went through. But right now we're not yet looking at doing the two together. We will eventually get there. It just hasn't happened yet.
I think if Peter Kryja from AFC First were here, and I've had many conversations with him about it, he would say that their default rates, and they've got a pretty good database on this, their default rates on unsecured 10-year term whole house or deep retrofit is, again, a very low default rate. And he attributes that, I think he attributes that more than anything to the fact that they've got really good underwriting. I guess so. They've got, but it's a little self-selecting in that they're looking at that and they're not lending to 550 credit scores and yeah, right. So he's, if you will, cherry picking. The question is, how do you scale that beyond the 680 credit scores, and then also, the challenge also is how do you sell whole house retrofits in any kind of scalable way? That's been our challenge.
And one of the ways we'll help them scale it is we're going to buy the loans from AFC to put into the renewable funding vehicle in the so-called WHEEL program, so that they have the gunpowder to go do more.
But on that, On your question of combining solar and efficiency, in the Connecticut Green Bank, they're looking at a residential program design that would combine solar and efficiency. And I think it's a great idea. One of the concerns we see in the contractor market is the solar installers are over here and the efficiency guys are over here. You need to bring together one offering for the customer. And so from a policy and financial perspective, I think it's great, but I hope we can get the delivery in the market where it needs to be so that consumers take it up.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi. Yes, I'm curious if there are plans to proliferate the sustainable energy utility model across the country.
John, I guess that's for you, huh?
Yeah, the model has had a lot of uptake particularly since we closed our transaction last August, and so we are also in discussion with some folks at DOE about an approach that would allow us to take this common documents approach, this aggregation scaling approach, out to the market and try and demonstrate it at a pilot scale so that the market can then take over and make this work. I just want to mention, and it builds on what Kerry was just saying, I think when you're doing any of these kinds of things, the Sustainable Energy Utility was built not only to do bond deals, it also does rebate programs, it does financing, it does a whole range of things. I think that you've got to build a credible institution, which I think goes back to the question. You've got to build a credible institution that's whose job it is to make sure it works with the contractor community to deliver what are effectively products that can, to some significant extent, be guaranteed. And so you've got to do that in order to make that happen. So yeah, that's our goal with the SEU approach.
And we did that transaction with them,
yes,
and we are talking with a number of other states to try and do something. The critical element there is that you have to have a state that's prepared to support something like that, and in good financial health, both of which Delaware was.
Because again, the state has to give the guarantee that the energy savings are going to be there, so the investors don't have to incur that risk.
If I could just real quick, though, I mean, the guarantee, I just wanted, because that is a very important point, the guarantee was that the state agency would pay its electric bill. Now, I haven't seen very many state agencies that have been out there saying, you know, this year we may back off on paying I think we actually took a guarantee that was functionally already there and made sure that that guarantee was then leveraged. And I think our work with Citi allowed us to then leverage that. And we are now looking at an opportunity to team with Citi in order to make this approach available long range. So the guarantee, as Richard is saying, is crucial in the model. But I just want to point out the guarantee that we built it around, and I think Marshall would agree on this, the guarantee is actually something that was already there. It was underutilized in the efficiency market.
Yes, sir.
I'm an energy manager in an industrial situation. I was wondering if this panel is covering any industrial energy efficiency aspects. So there's something I'd like to ask a question. I was just wondering if you're willing to answer. Maybe I'll try it. Okay. In an industrial environment, you've got quite a different animal when it comes to the financing of the modification that you're proposing. Quite often you have the reluctance on the part of an industrial facility to allow a third party to come in and actually own that piece of equipment and lease it and try to get the value back out of it. There are liability issues. There are concerns about whether or not they can regain their value if something goes wrong. I would be interested in your experiences in trying to mitigate that and trying to encourage a company to go ahead and use a third party for investment.
I don't want to be the only one talking, but okay. Sorry. Yes, we've had similar experiences. Our experience at Citi has frankly been frustrating in the industrial space. We find that typically what happens is when a huge amount of work goes in at the operations level and the engineering level till people say, yes, we need to go ahead and do the project. And we go through all the work to figure out how it can be done and the structures around it and how it can be financed and what we're ready to do. And at the 11th hour, before we're actually ready to do it, eventually it goes up to someone in the treasurer's office who all along has been saying, we're not allocating money to energy efficiency. Yeah, it'd be great to spend $50 million to upgrade energy efficiency in our plants in the U.S., but I need to use the $50 million to build a new plant in Russia or India or China. I'm not doing it here. Well, at the 11th hour, when we're finally ready to go do the financing, the treasurer's office says, this is crazy, this is too complicated, it's too expensive, we'll just issue 50 or 100 millions of commercial paper and we'll finance the thing on balance sheet and let's move on. And that's happened to us, unfortunately, a couple of times now. So the good news is they did the EE retrofit and they finally decided to do it, but they threw out all the financing that we'd come up with because it's always going to be cheaper for an investment-grade corporate to finance it on balance sheet than it is to use any of these structures. It just is.
I'll just say I came across that in the commercial sector as well, so it's not specific to the industrial world. You'd go through the exercise, just as we talked about on the homeowner side, of underwriting the financing and making sure that there was sort of return there. And as soon as you can prove out the return, it starts to become a pretty good investment opportunity for you, which means you don't need the financing anymore. So I would say that the same concerns are sort of market-wide regardless of the sector.
Yes.
Hi. Now, in lieu of the fact that we don't have an energy policy and we don't have a national infrastructure bank, which could actually support some of the financial structures that you're talking about, how can we reward states? Like when you said New York, for example, pressured the utility to say that they're going to do this, and so they had to. States like Delaware have been a big fan of JV for a while, and it's a small state. So how can we create from the national level, and I know, Richard, you've told me this before, pressure, or how can we reward states to do more of this? I mean, what type of policies should we encourage states to adopt versus others if we had to pick? Because we're in a situation where there's a lot of ambiguity right now in Congress, but how can we do that advice where we take from the one-stop shop idea that we mentioned earlier? Maybe the DOE can create that one-stop shop and figure out some policies for the states to adopt. What would you say?
So I think maybe John and then Carrie.
Yeah, I think that's very important. I think the federal role in this can be a couple of levels. I do agree that if we could get an infrastructure bank approach that would be in some fashion, that would be terrific. But if the feds are not going to be the infrastructure bank, they can at least reward those states that set up these kinds of mechanisms and let them be the kind of pioneers and the pilots to make this sort of thing happen. So I think the federal role can be, if it can get something like an infrastructure bank up, but if it cannot, which it doesn't look like that's going to happen anytime soon, it can certainly make strategic to states the notion that if you go down this path, you're going to get the kind of support on the federal end. And that support on the federal end can again be to take the common document models and put them out there so that all the states have them and make it possible for many participants to then come in. And I think allowing the states to, as they have historically done, play to some extent a laboratory role in that and find out what works best in their jurisdictions. I guess we're adding flavors. That's all we're ever going to do, Marshall. And we're going to add flavors to this. But I think different states have different needs for this kind of approach. And so, again, allowing some level in which the states can go after that innovation and support that innovation.
The Green Bank model in Connecticut was modeled off of the national model that didn't take hold, but it was one of the selling points to the legislature is someday this will take hold at the federal level, and we want to be first in line. We want to have our act together and know how to deliver into the market and be ready to accept that money when it becomes available someday, God willing. So I think that's a role, and then showcasing success. Yeah. But states have to succeed.
Hi. This is probably oriented toward Marshall. Given that city has a pretty big appetite from a lending perspective and covered by different regulations, is there a possibility to get like a CRA credit for doing energy efficiency lending into those markets? And that could be one perspective to look at in getting CRA credits and then structuring those into transactions as old CRA deals were done. The other question would be around the CETA legislation that's been stuck in Congress for a while. It covers a lot of attributes in terms of guarantees, including for securitization. If you look at the House versus Senate bill, all the elements are covered in there within, it acts like an infrastructure fund, but it's really for renewables and as a guarantee mechanism. And then lastly, I've written also about this, but a GSC type of mechanism that can kind of guarantee the super senior or some part of that, and then maybe you get a hedging mechanism with an the first loss attachment point sold into the capital markets, something like what was done with the Moderns deals with Freddie Mac's portfolios back in the early 2000s.
All good points, all good ideas. We would love it if you could get CRE credits in conjunction with renewable energy. We'd like to see CETA, but I don't think that's happening anytime soon. GSE would be nice. Many of this may get adopted at the state level rather than the feds. As much as Delaware and Connecticut have been very, very innovative, I'd be remiss if I didn't also mention California. They've really been a big leader in getting stuff done. Governor or former Governor Schwarzenegger was a big a supporter of all of this. And that's where it has to come from, is if the political leadership really supports it, it'll get through. But one last thing is, just to correct what you said, for this market to work properly long-term, clean energy in general, but also energy efficiency as a subsector, it's not just going to be bank lending. We've got to get institutional investors involved. Banks are not good providers of long-term fixed-rate capital for anything. And in today's environment where you've got to answer to the Fed and the OCC and the FDIC and the SEC and everybody else, it's not going to happen with banks in the U.S. It'll be more likely to happen with banks outside the U.S. when the Greece contagion finally ends, hopefully, in the not-too-distant future. So we need to get institutional investors involved, and to do that, the super senior structures and other guarantee mechanisms, junior seniors, whatever, is definitely a way to go.
Thanks. One last question, Matt.
Okay. My question is, maybe the panelists, could you maybe expand a little bit on why it sounds like this is a fourth leg of a stool here. And by that I mean is you're adding a new product or new stream, energy efficiency, where most people really don't think about energy efficiency. I think the point before was you think about your comfort or climate. And so if I'm really sensitive to how much it costs for me to heat my home, well then maybe I'll put on a sweater. But otherwise, if I really don't care, I'll just turn up the heat. And so right now, this cost is borne either by the person that's responsible for the real estate, okay, i.e. in the form of rent or something else like that, or the utility, or possibly the tenant. And so it seems like you're somehow stripping out and addressing energy efficiency and adding a new cash flow stream or something else like that, and I'm somewhat confused or questioning whether this is really has some type of long-term viability. And I believe it does, because there's already been a tremendous level of investment in it, but maybe you could just expand on that as to why you have some level of confidence that there is some type of long-term viability that just needs some additional support from the public policy perspective.
I would start by putting the first slide back up just around the size of the market. I mean, this is a non-negotiated, undebatable, massive opportunity, and it actually impacts every single one of us. So, you're never going to have 100% adoption by anyone, and a lot of times people will continue to not recognize the importance, but with the size of the market that's that significant, it impacts all of us. We don't need everyone. We just need a fraction to actually have a huge impact, both from a sustainability perspective, an environmental perspective, and an economic perspective. So I don't think there's any way to look the other way.
From our perspective, we've invested in the United States. I mean, we have the track record we have in the UK and Australia and New Zealand, and we've seen those markets, especially in the UK, be a tremendous scale when there's an aggregation of some unit, whether it's a carbon credit or whether it's a dollar credit, or whatever that unit is. if there's an aggregation of that and there's a value associated with it and there's an offtake, I mean, so the structures that would be formed around this, we've seen evidence and profited from a very large market with 65, 70 million people and 25 million homes. We look at the U.S. and say at 125 million homes and 80 million of them are under-insulated or inefficient, and then go to all the commercial and industrial and university building stock. There's enough work for hundreds of years for lots and lots of contractors. So we remain very excited about it, and we think that establishing a market around it is the way to take it from a nice little business in discrete areas and make it quite large.
Well, I think on that note, that's an optimistic note to end on. I'd like to thank the panel for an excellent discussion, and then we should all go to Potomac A.
Thanks.